Welcome in to another edition of Inside Carolina's Noon Dish. I'm Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. It is January the 8th, Don Callahan. I know you've been busy. I
Mhm.
have a new puppy. That's my excuse for being
Oh,
tired.
what's the name of your puppy?
Her name is Nala. I will debut her on a podcast shortly, but right now I'm at home solo and she's in her crate. And if I go like this, it's because I can hear her raising Cain. But I know I'm not near as tired as you.
Well,
Just
congratulations on the
yeah,
new addition.
yeah. I swore I'd never have another puppy, and after our other dog passed in April, I swore I was going to go at least a year, and here we are, not a year. It's been a year for you so far, and it's just 8 days in. Don, can you quantify how busy that you and the rest of the Inside Carolina staff covering all this Bill Belichick recruiting portal stuff? I mean, just how hectic has it been?
Well, can I first want to give a shout out to our chat MVP going
You
with
always, you know, I
I
feel
don't want to
like
get
working with you is helping me with her, the new dog, because I tell her and I say, let's go somewhere, and she goes the completely opposite way.
so you
But
should
yeah,
you should be used to it. But I gotta keep track of the housekeeping here. So chat MVP,
absolutely.
Troy Shields was very active. We had a lot of new people. Oh, I guess it was 2 weeks ago. Was it 2 weeks ago?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So
It's been a while.
yeah, it's been a while. So hopefully today is, and I can't see it, but today is the same. But Troy was I believe a new person, at least for the Noon Dish, and so congratulations. This podcast is dedicated to him. But to answer your question, yeah, it's been absolutely nuts. There's, just when you think you have an opportunity to kind of do life stuff, while you're in the middle of that, something happens. I think everything's all tied up. I go for a walk. 15 minutes in, I get a phone call. I think, did I tell you I'm coaching basketball? Kind of, sort of.
So
Mi-
you're also
mi-
coaching basketball.
Middle. Well, it's only like a 2 day a week commitment, and I'm technically the assistant coach. My daughter is the head coach, and it's middle school kids, mostly boys, but we do have 2 girls on our team.
Is it rec
So
ball? Like co-ed rec
it's
ball?
so it's not it kind of is, but it's not. And from a talent standpoint, it is like a significant step up because it's with the group that Bree used to train with for basketball. So all those kids go to training, so they're advanced for their age. The problem is I have 7th graders, and I have I say middle school. I have a 4th grader on the team too. So there's a little bit of juggling because clearly, no matter how good you are, there's a difference between a 7th and 8th grader. So I mean, a 7th and a 4th grader. But anyway, so yeah, so it's the portal stuff has been absolutely nuts because things are just happening so quickly. And I was just having a conversation with another writer about it. Is you're seeing kids visit 4 places and then end up committing to a school they didn't even visit, or they come out with the top 4 and they're visiting a school that's not even the top 4. Or you have a kid who is kind of locked in and has committed, as signed, and yet doesn't announce it because he just doesn't care about announcing it. So it's just a really kind of crazy time. It's so different from high school recruiting, and things are happening a lot of different moments. I have purposely focused, like the scoop, for example, on the next 24 hours. And I know everybody else wants to know about the 4-star whatever that's visiting 3 days later. I have not focused on that. I might mention them, but I have not focused on that because there's a very good chance that something happens with that visit. And even with the visits that I am talking about within the next 24 hours, they could all change. And it's just absolutely nuts, just how this stuff goes. And so it's just kind of keeping track of it has been crazy.
So, and shout out to the 130 plus that are here already. We had a huge day last week. I guess the Bill Belichick effect has really hit the Noon Dish in the last couple of times. And shout out to Inside Carolina fans for caring, because Don certainly puts in a ton of work, as does Ben and everybody else that does this. But Don, a lot of people ask me, how do these guys visit Carolina one day, Oklahoma the next, Oregon the next, Alabama the next. How does that work for transfer portal kids? I mean, I assume they're flying all over the country. It's not on their dime,
No.
correct? It's on the school's dime. So these are basically quote unquote official visits, just similar to high school, but just very compacted and often back to back to back to back because it's a
Yes.
speed dating thing, right?
Yes, yes. And I don't know how the schools, if you are, I guess, some sort of travel coordinator for each school, I don't know how you do it because so the school can pay for, like, let's say a kid is at Southern Cal right now. So, and he's going to visit North Carolina. A school, UNC, will pay for the ticket from LAX to RDU, right? So, but the problem is you don't know if, is that kid going to still stick to this plan? And so I'm sure they have something set up to where they could purchase tickets and cancel them, and they don't have to deal with the same BS that we deal with just because they book flights in such a high volume. But yeah, I mean, really, so you get 48 hours for an official visit. That's the NCAA rule. But most of these visits are taking 24 hours, and some of them aren't even like an overnight sort of stay. Some of them are literally just kid arrives in the morning and they leave in the evening and they go somewhere else. Now, most of them do end up being like an overnight sort of stay sort of thing, but it's just so different. Whereas a high school official visit, it's more about having fun and going out with your player host. And I don't even think I haven't talked a whole lot because transfer portal recruits aren't don't make themselves available for comment as much as high school recruits. But I have not talked to a transfer official visitor who has had a player host at North Carolina, and that's just because of the nature of it. And I think if you haven't yet, and the Q&A with Gavin Gibson is so has so much information, and because he's so descriptive and he's so candid and he's so forthcoming with everything, and going into detail with everything of just the process and all that and just his mindset, I think it kind of sheds a good light on what's kind of going on here. Is that these guys are making business decisions. High school kids, they are, but most of them aren't making business decisions. They're making college decisions. And so for like a Gavin Gibson, he has a certain objective, a very specific objective that he's trying to accomplish. And a lot of other kids are the same sort of boat. And so they're going into these visits with just a tunnel vision on what they're focused on. So they don't need to go be taken out to eat. They don't need to do all this other stuff. They don't need all these tours. They don't need to go to the party scene. If you're 22, 23 years old because you're, a redshirt senior, then you don't want to mess with the party stuff. You want to just figure out, okay, who's going to be coaching me? What classes do I need? Am I going to be able to transfer all these hours? All that other stuff. So it's just a different sort of process for those guys. So anyway, so to answer your question, I know I kind of went off here, but the visits are so much shorter that it allows a little bit more for this back to back to back. And plus the kids just, want to do that. But even with within all of that, just pushing the visits so tight together, there's been just an absolute ton of changes with everything. I mean, how many times have we said, okay, this kid's coming today? Nope, it's not coming today. He's coming tomorrow. He visited Florida State today instead. And it's just, we're trying to do our best and getting the information. At one point, that information was correct. The problem is it just changes so quickly, and it's tough to keep up.
Yeah, that's a great point. It was correct when it was written.
Yeah.
Anything beyond that is the nature of it. You mentioned the Gibson Q&A, and it is a fascinating look into the process. I mean, he talks about meeting with the coaches, meeting with his coach, and talking ball and all that. Don, you mentioned something, and I'm gonna go ahead and ask it because it's another thing that people are worrying about or fretting about a little bit, and that is the coaching staff hadn't been filled out yet. If you're a defensive guy, you obviously know who your defense coordinator is going to be, or you assume it's going to be. If you're an offensive guy, I guess it's Freddie Kitchens. I mean, it hadn't been announced until things are announced publicly. We're going to assume, and that's a that's a thin line to walk. But how has that affected things for guys that are so concerned, or at least on the high school level, and maybe on the transfer portal level, but so concerned about who's going to be coaching them? Obviously, Bill Belichick brings a lot of gravitas with the name and his success at other places.
So I think on the high school level, outside of the hitting the recruiting trail, as you know, and what I mean by that is the contact period started on Monday, and so colleges are allowed to send out all of their coaches on the road to visit high schools and evaluate, talk to targets, that sort of thing. That obviously puts you at a huge disadvantage when you have a smaller staff that like North Carolina has right now. North Carolina is a very small staff right now. But from a standpoint of a kid wanting to know who their position coach is, I think that North Carolina still has a little bit of time for high school kids. Now, transfer portal kids, I'm surprised it hasn't been more of an issue, but I guess maybe it has been a pretty big issue because there's been a lot of guys who have officially visited North Carolina and not ended up in North Carolina. Now, how much of that is because of the lack of a position coach and other factors? It's just so hard to kind of entangle everything and to figure out what's what with a lot of that stuff. But it certainly does not help you when you have you bring a kid in and he says, and it's important to him who his position coach is going to be, and you're not able to produce that coach or tell that recruit who that coach is. And so I'm sure it's been a factor. I don't know how much.
Yeah, it's tough to quantify, and we'll see. One thing I do is, to your point about how everything changes all the time and all. When they line up in late August, that's when you know who's going to be on the roster and who's coaching everybody. That's the kind of approach I take. I get people wanting to know the news, and obviously it matters in the recruiting. But um, I made a joke on the message boards is I know who buys all the toilet paper and the milk when they say it's going to be bad weather. Folks fret about it and go out and purchase all those things. But Don, these young men and some guys sometimes they're older. They're flying. You mentioned LAX. I'd never fly to LAX. Always use Santa Ana. It's right there as well, and it's a lot smaller. But they're flying multiple stops. How do you consume? How do these guys? You talk to a lot of them. How do they consume all the information they're getting? I mean, it is insane.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I just don't know. I think there's certain factors. It's so, as I said, I mean, I'm going to sound like a broken record. It's just so different with portal recruiting guys. I do think that's where the NIL stuff does make more of an impact. So maybe you have a certain number and 2 or 3 schools are reaching that number and the other schools aren't, then it makes it kind of easier for you to kind of eliminate some schools. As I've mentioned before, the evaluation process, and not just from a talent standpoint, but a fit and a character evaluation, that's ongoing and that continues into the visits. So there have been some visits that I'm aware of where, and this happened even underneath Mac Brown, where UNC is obviously pursuing a kid, brings him in on for official visit, and then decides during the official visit this guy's not a fit here, and the two parties go their separate ways. So, my point of that is that some of these schools kind of eliminate themselves or pull themselves out of certain races. And then really, if you look at it though, while we do definitely have some kids who are visiting like 4 or 5 schools, there's a lot of situations where you're just visiting one school. Gavin Gibson's probably a special case, but he only visited North Carolina. The I'm forgetting him now. The offensive lineman from Rice. Let me see if I can find his name. So Chad Lindbergh. I mean, he only visited North Carolina. And there was a lot of other guys who kind of in the same sort of situation where they only visited 1 or 2 schools, so that made it pretty easy for them. And I'm sure we could go, and nobody wants to do this, but we can go down the list, and William Boone only visited 3 schools. And one of them was before the holiday break, and he visited North Carolina and Colorado back to back this past weekend, and then decided on North Carolina. So for him, it was a little bit easier. So I think that the kids who are making, 4 or 5 visits, that's not really the norm, although it definitely happens. You know what I mean? So most of the kids, it's a little bit more consumable because they're only making 1 or 2 visits.
One thing I'd like to look at one day, and this is far more work that needs to be done now, is high school recruits, they like to go on all their visits and all,
Mhm.
and we know it's changed, and then they pick a school. I wonder how many portal guys go on visits and then pick the last school they visited. When you got a guy like the running back Wayman Jordan ends
Yeah.
up at Southern Cal and ends up picking. So I just wonder how it works for these portal guys in the
Well,
process that
technically, he's not
they
a
go
portal
through.
guy. He was a JUCO.
Well, I mean, he's not a
I
high
know.
school young
I
man.
grouped him with all my coverage. I grouped him with the portal guys because essentially there's a lot of parallels between his situation and the portal guys. So I get it.
Yeah, and then you look at somebody like Travis Shaw, who left Carolina, sticks around Carolina, goes on one visit and commits somewhere, commits to
Yeah.
Texas. So it's just a wild process. Anything has stood out, or has anything stood out to you in covering this, and maybe common themes that you've heard from different players? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but
Yeah.
common themes from players or from agents or whatever that you've heard about North Carolina.
That's a good question. Yeah, I'd probably have to think about that a little bit more. And my brain is so fried. I mean, I think everyone the guys who have committed to North Carolina obviously love the how Belichick is bringing the NFL sort of into the football building. Not just on the coaching staff, but also throughout the Keenan football building, as far as like the nutritionist, the strength and conditioning coach, and all that sort of stuff. That has been brought up multiple times, and yeah, I mean that's probably the main theme that I've heard, and that's one of when someone has chosen North Carolina, that's definitely been something that has been mentioned. Maybe it's not the primary reason, but it's definitely one of the reasons that they have mentioned.
I was watching another podcast or YouTube show, and they were talking about relationships and recruiting. How big are relationships in portal recruiting? It doesn't seem like it matters as much. You mentioned business decisions.
Yeah. So no, it's not. It doesn't matter as much because of, as you called it, speed dating. With high school recruiting, in a lot of instances, you're recruiting somebody for a couple of years, and the coaches who typically end up having their schools at the very end with a specific recruiter, typically the coaches who have been there for a very long time. How often do we hear a high school kid mention, "Oh, they were the first to offer me"? Well, a lot of that is that they were the first to offer you, but also that coach has been recruiting that kid for the entire time since that offer. But yes, with portal recruiting, it's as far as landing a kid is not impactful. What we have seen in the past, not necessarily this year because of the coaching change, but in prior years, we have seen those relationships help North Carolina kind of identify their targets quicker. You look at Sampson, Howard Sampson, who was originally recruited by Randy Clements at North Texas and all that. That kind of helped them. And there's a bunch of other situations where a prior relationship, UNC recruited a lot of guys that played at Georgia Tech. Well, that's where Pat Sudis was at, and eventually that's where I'm going blank on his name.
Jeff Collins.
Jeff Collins was at also. So I think it helps you kind of identify things and kind of answer the questions. Because I think Pat, when he came on here before, talked about how as part of their due diligence, they lean on their networking. Someone might have worked at, let's say that they're recruiting a kid from wherever, Arkansas, and somebody on the staff worked with somebody that's at Arkansas staff. They could reach out to that coach and say, "Hey, what can you tell me about this kid from an intangible standpoint?" And that kind of goes towards the due diligence. Well, you can take out that step altogether, avoid the middleman completely if you have that relationship previously. But I don't think it's as much of an impact. It is an impact, but it's not as much of an impact when it comes to actually landing a kid as it is with high school recruits.
All right, I got a ton of questions. We're not going to
Okay.
take up the whole thing, but a lot of people want to hear about specific guys. But how much is tampering a thing? We hear about it all the time. Oh, that was tampering. It was definitely tampering. Does it even matter anymore? But it is interesting that Price Yates is in the portal, comes out of the portal, wears out Carolina, and now he's going to play for Carolina. We all remember the Quincy Roach mess, Mac Brown's first year. He's going to go down in lore on Inside Carolina message boards. But how is that a thing anymore? And is it? And how big are agents? It's crazy for me to hear folks say, "Well, we spoke to his agent." It's just a different world.
Yes, and it is a different world, and dealing with agents is something that, and I mentioned this in the last podcast, I've done a whole lot this year, and I didn't do it at all previously. And dealing with them is a whole lot different than dealing with a high school kid, for obvious reasons. But yeah, the tampering stuff definitely happens, and it's almost like it feels like to me negative recruiting. Like everybody always accuses everybody negative recruiting and says that they don't negatively recruit, when the reality is absolutely everybody negatively recruits. They might just wrap it up a little bit nicer or present it in a way of, hey, I'm just looking out for you, or hey, I'm just giving you all the information. And I think tampering is starting to feel like it's one of those things that everybody wants to kind of point their finger at somebody else for doing, but they're probably doing it also. Now, maybe that's not the case for like a group of 5 program. Like, who is Jim Mora calling up to tamper with, to come to UConn? I mean, maybe because of just that setting, it's a little bit harder to kind of be like, hey, jump in the portal, you can come to UConn. But where it's a little different that if you're not, and I'll just take it away from North Carolina, but if you're at Auburn and a kid is at Kent State, and I'm completely making this up,
Yep.
and reaches out to a Kent State kid and say, hey, you want to play the SEC? That's a little bit, so maybe the group of 5 guys don't do it as much or don't do it at all. But I mean, I think definitely at the Power 4 level, it certainly feels like, from everything that I've kind of picked up, that everybody's kind of doing some sort of form of tampering. And it would be great for us to, and this is a whole different rabbit hole, for us to kind of get all this stuff fixed so this stuff doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's just open season, so anything less would be uncivilized. To quote the great commercial, you spoke of negative recruiting.
Uh-huh.
I got one. How
Okay.
many times? How many times did folks negative recruit against Mac Brown, saying he's not going to be there? He's old. He's old. Well,
Yeah,
there's a
I
tweet.
did. Go ahead.
Let me finish because this
Sure,
is
sure,
it.
sure.
It dovetails into what's going on now. We got somebody posted on the message boards. Tom Pelissero tweeted that NFL teams are snooping around Bill Belichick again, including the Raiders, who Tom Brady, of course, partially owns something. How much negative recruiting is going on, not only with the age factor with Belichick, but also the NFL factor? It feels like I've heard, um, some recruits mention that they want to know how long he's going to be there and all. Even though I think the transfer portal eliminates all that kind of stuff, and the freedom of movement and those worries. But yeah, what's your thoughts there?
Well, I'll I want to address your last message, because we talked about this before. I just don't think, like, if we were to talk to one of the Harris twins at Weddington, they're not, when they pick a school, they're not picking that school thinking, oh, well, I can just transfer out of here, because that's just not what people do. They're picking a school because that's where they feel like that's the stop. And so I just don't think that, one, they're high school kids, so I don't think that they have a full grasp of reality, and anybody, you have college boys, but anybody who has young kids, they know, firsthand that they do not grasp reality whatsoever. But to answer your question, so I didn't encounter the um the age thing as much as people assumed. Now, maybe I'm just, you know, Maybe I just didn't miss. Maybe I missed it. Now, did I hear it? Yes, but I didn't encounter the age thing with Mac Brown that much. There was the, I guess the best, I guess solid example was Jonathan Paler. It apparently was an issue for him. But beyond that, I don't have a whole lot of solid examples to kind of point to. Now, does it help? No, it doesn't help. And it was something that I'm sure was used behind closed doors, and maybe kind of, if a kid was kind of on the edge of picking North Carolina, another school, and the other school is like, hey, our coach is 42 and Mac Brown is 70 or whatever it was, at the time. Sure, maybe that tips the scale. It certainly doesn't help, but it wasn't hurting. I think actually the NFL stuff is more impactful. And I think that, just looking at the scoop that I posted last night with the Harrison twins, which is why I use that example, is, I don't know who exactly asked the question. This was a story that was passed on to me from the coach over there, but it was the Harrison twins, Aiden and Drew. They're 4-star defensive linemen. And then their cousin, TJ Davis, who's a 4-star linebacker and who's committed to Notre Dame. And somebody asked Mac Brown just how long you plan on staying there or staying in North Carolina. And so
ask Bill Belichick.
Yeah, ask Bill Belichick. Yes. And I've had other recruits and I've had parents ask me this question. Now, keep in mind, has it been a month yet since he was hired on, was it December 13th?
Officially, yeah, around that time.
Yeah. So it hasn't been a month yet, and I have fielded this question pretty frequently. So when I bring it up on the message boards and people just freak out, this is why I'm not just pulling this out of my butt. And it was great to have that example from, a coach who coaches a powerhouse in the state to say, hey, my kids are asking about this. So now, if you're an opposing coach, and now the Harris twins, I think they have like a top schools list that doesn't include North Carolina. I venture that they will visit UNC at some point. I still think there's a lot of ground that needs to be made up there in order for UNC to really have a legit chance with those guys. But if you are a school who's recruiting against North Carolina and you already know that these kids have that doubt, it's very easy. It's low-hanging fruit. You mention it to the kid. And these rumors, like you mentioned, are not going to help the situation. And really, let me just ask you, if tomorrow morning you woke up and heard that Belichick took the job with the Cowboys or Raiders, would it shock you?
I don't know if I can. I'd be 50-50.
Okay.
I'm very cynical, Don. I'm not going to.
I don't want to
stir. I don't want to stir that up, but I've always been a Lucy, going to pull that ball no matter what person. So I'm not a fair person to ask for that, just to be honest.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
You're not getting me down that hole. Yes, it would shock. It would shock me a lot.
Okay.
I have no idea because I don't set expectations on human beings because this is far afield of what we're doing. People are going to let you down,
Yeah.
God, if you don't want to be let down, get a dog, which is why I just got another one. So,
God, Tommy, I need it. Tommy, you need a hug.
You're probably right.
I'm going to drive to Clayton right when we're done. I'm driving to Clayton to give you a hug.
Come on over and give me a hug. I need some sleep. If you'll just puppy sit for a little while. But let's move on from that. Let me do something. Let me talk about some people that are always solid. Who is it? It's Johnny T-Shirt. JohnnyT-shirt.com. I need to get some hoodies from Johnny T-Shirt because all I've got is my son's toss-outs, and I wear them. But Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-shirt.com, sponsors of this show, sponsors of Inside Carolina's podcast network, and great friends of everybody. If you're a Carolina person, you know Johnny T-Shirt. If you're a Carolina gear person, you've been in Johnny T-Shirt. Go see him on East Franklin Street or go see him online. 10% off your order if you're a premium subscriber. If you're watching this podcast and you're not an Inside Carolina premium subscriber, I don't know what to tell you because you probably don't recognize that man, Don Callahan, and all the work he does. So get on there, get your Inside Carolina premium subscription, and get Johnny T-Shirts 10% discount. They sell it all year round. It's not just a holiday thing, and especially since the snow and ice is coming. Instead of buying all the milk and eggs and the bread, go to Johnny T-Shirt, buy all their sweatshirts and cold weather gear. National guys will pay the bills. It's noon dish on a Wednesday. Okay, Don, we're back with Noon Dish. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt. Like I said, I'll get to our second sponsor here shortly. 290 people in the chat. I do want to ask you a couple high school recruiting things
Okay.
because I think this is something that's relevant as well. And this was one of those things we heard when Coach Belichick was hired, is he's not going to go out and recruit. He's going to sit back and let them bring everybody to him. Well, he's been traversing the state and your scoops have talked about it, and everybody on social media has seen it. He's been going around. He was down here at South Garner. He needs to get to Clayton. Clayton's got a couple studs down here. But your thoughts on that, and what have you learned about that? I mean, he's out doing the legwork with his son a couple times. We saw that on McAfee. You got to get out and you got to meet these high school coaches. And it doesn't matter who you are, you still have to press that flesh. He's doing it. At least he's been doing it the last few days.
Yeah, I think particularly with the guys that he went and saw, he needed to actually go to their schools to make some sort of impact on them. I think it would have been, without those visits, it would have been tougher to draw some of those guys to campus, because you got to remember some of the schools. So we talked about TJ Davis committed to Notre Dame, where you have Leo Delaney, who we have some interesting info about him and how this visit impacted him. But he came out with a top 8 that did not include North Carolina in November. Rodney Dunham from Myers Park also came out with top schools list, I think around November-ish, that didn't include North Carolina. Brody Keith never has, as far as I can think, has not come out with the top schools list, but I've never gotten the warm and fuzzies about him with North Carolina. So he was a guy, and he's a guy that North Carolina has struggled to get on campus. So obviously going to him helps with that, kind of shoring things up with Zaid Lott, your commitment and doing it in person, I think made an impact, because I think there was some frustration there, a little bit of waiting, because of how long they waited until they heard from someone from North Carolina. And I think doing it in person kind of wiped away all that frustration, as opposed to making a kid drive up there and worrying, well, if I come up there, is he going to just tell me I don't have a scholarship anymore, sort of thing. But to do it in person, I think it kind of wiped all that sort of stuff away. You talked about South Garner, the offensive lineman there. He hasn't come out with any top schools list, but I'm pretty certain that he hasn't visited North Carolina in well over a year, maybe even a year and a half. So obviously seeing him in person is huge, but also seeing these recruits, or seeing these high school coaches, going over to Roseville, that's another guy, Xavion Griffin Hayes, who was committed to North Carolina, decommitted shortly after Mac Brown's firing. And so to see him in person is huge, but to go to Roseville with their loaded roster, to go to Weddington, who, yes, they have 3 guys that might end up somewhere else, but Weddington always seems to have recruits. And so to have a good relationship with Andy Capone over there is significant. To go over to Huff, that always has recruits, is pretty significant. So I think the schools that he chose were smart decisions as far as where he went. And I think it obviously helps North Carolina with recruiting the 2026 class.
Yeah, nothing beats a personal appearance. And people can talk about Zoom calls or StreamYards or phone calls and all, but seeing somebody in person makes a difference across the spectrum, but especially for these young guys, and the coaches and the coaching staffs at these high schools. I mean, I was at Clayton several times, and you've got all these high level coaches. It's like, whoa, I'm
Yeah.
grown too. It's like, whoa, this so and so's here. That's a pretty big deal, and we're seeing it with Belichick making the rounds. You spoke of high school coaches, and I asked you off the air, and really it's relatively new news. Jeremiah Holloway broke or wrote about IMG's Billy Miller starting. How big is it to get? We've seen it in the past where high school coaches are hired to get a player or whatever, but IMG is a different animal. And
Yeah.
powerhouse, a national powerhouse. How big a deal are hires like that, do you think, or are they a big deal for a school like North Carolina?
Yeah. So the thing is that's really interesting is he's IMG, as you mentioned, it's not your typical high school. So I mean they actually recruit. So whereas if you were to pull off another, well, I guess it depends on who you ask, but if you were to pull a coach from Charlotte, some of the other coaches in Charlotte would say that that coach recruits, but they don't typically recruit at the level of a college coach or IMG would do. And so then you also got to look at the angle of the fact that he has relationships with all those kids at IMG, and kids go to IMG for the sole purpose of preparing for big time college football so that they could play in the NFL. And so North Carolina hasn't had a whole lot of success recruiting IMG, and this hiring will only help improve North Carolina's chances in landing those kids. Beyond that, I don't know a whole lot about Billy Miller. I did some research on him. Seems like he has a pretty big special teams background, has some NFL background. So that kind of fits into, and I believe, and I have so many names in my head, but I believe he might have even worked with Belichick at some point. So clearly, it's going with the theme of what Belichick has mentioned about having an NFL influence on his staff.
Yeah, I told you about our story about going to IMG, didn't I? We were
I
down
think
in
you did.
yeah, funny story. It's tough to get on that campus if you're not a recruit or whatever. And I had two recruits in the car, so we drove around campus. It's unbelievable. I mean, there are colleges that aren't nice as that campus, that IMG campus down in, I guess, Sarasota or Bradenton or whatever it is proper. But yeah, it's an interesting hire. A couple other news pieces coming out with staff being built. But Don, anything we haven't talked about? I mean, the focus is there on the high school recruiting now with the visits and going around and all that. The portal recruiting is still hot. There's some questions in the chat, and if you've got some questions for Don, right here at the end, throw them in the chat. I've got a couple, and also top 5 before we forget. Top 5 broken New Year's resolutions. Top 5 broken New Year's resolutions. And Jack in the chat, I see you, buddy. I've got the question starred. I
If they
got
could
it
only
starred the first
see
time.
that you have it starred.
Yeah, if they could
But
only
see,
see.
in Jack's defense, there are some questions that definitely slip by the goalkeeper.
They do, because we got 300 people in here and so many people are peppered, but I did not miss that one, Jack. I promise. In fact, you're going on the screen. You should have a profile picture. Don, is Carolina recruiting punters? I don't think people are too enamored with Tom McGinnis last year.
Yeah, I am not aware of any. That does not mean that North Carolina is not pursuing punters, because as you could probably surmise, there are a lot of moving parts, and new coaches are being added to the staff, and those coaches will obviously have a say in certain things and probably have guys they like. That's the interesting thing about IMG is that, if you go to high school football games, right, Tommy?
I've
And
never seen a decent punter in high school
yeah,
football game
so
around
yeah,
here.
so what I'm talking about. Is like, yeah, you can see some really most are crabby punters. Most you kind of hold your breath when it's a kicker. Almost surprises you if they make like a 30-yarder sort of thing. But IMG, that's not the problem. They probably have like 3 deep, punters, 3 deep kickers, and because they do have different teams. They have their main team that they travel with, and they have a couple other teams that play different schedules or whatever. So yeah, so I imagine that's an angle you can kind of look at. But I am not aware of any punters that North Carolina is pursuing. I know that the prior staff that was kind of on their transfer portal wish list, but things kind of change with the new staff. So I don't know.
I do find it interesting that the Australian punters are hot still as well across the country. I do also, Don, find it interesting how many North Carolina kids end up being kickers for teams like Alabama and Oregon and all that. It's fascinating
Well,
how that
who
works.
that is. That's Dan Orner.
Yeah.
He is, to me, the best kicking coach in the nation. And when I find a kicker, I'm like, oh, that's a great kicker, and I kind of look through, and he's trained with Dan Orner at some point. And so, shout out to Dan. If anybody has a son who's a kicker, if you're a high school kid during your lunch break listening to or watching the Noon Dish, Dan Orner, reach out to him. He'll definitely get you right.
Hey, we had him on the show one time. Dude
Did
is
you?
intense. Yes, I had to go back
He's
and
a good
find
dude.
it.
I always enjoy talking to him, and it's funny because he throws all these names at me, and I'm just quickly kind of trying to jot them down because, I'm just not, kickers it's just a different world. So yeah, he's great. He's awesome.
Yeah, he was a great guest on. I think Joey and I had him. It's been a couple years ago. I have to dig it out of the archives. Let's look at Of course, Jack asked, "Can Belichick hire Dan Orner?"
So
I think he
Dan
probably
does
makes
have
good money.
he has a day job, and my understanding, he makes pretty good money with that.
All right, let's go. I'm gonna rapid fire these. Don, did the hire of Coach Belichick make your job more hectic, less busy, or little
Dude,
change?
how if I took a shot every time I was asked some version of this question, I probably would have died of alcohol poisoning. I mean, here's the thing. Our coverage. Let me ask you, Tommy, because Tommy and I obviously do the podcast, but really we don't kind of work together on a daily basis. But you do obviously visit Inside Carolina, I would hope. Our coverage from the portal, from the recruiting stuff, has it been any different this year or since December 13th, compared to a year ago?
No, I mean the duck on the surface looks the exact same.
Okay.
Now the feet might be pedaling a lot faster in different directions, but
you have to make certain adjustments because every coaching staff is different, and every situation is different. So we got to make certain adjustments. We don't, I don't. It's tough for me to answer this question because I obviously have to protect where I get my information from. But I think we are producing more information now than we were a year ago and the year before that. So,
when you're good, you're good.
No.
Once a basketball player told me, "Shooters shoot."
Yeah.
And it didn't really apply to that person because they're shooting about 20%.
We have, and it's not just.
Don is always great.
I do want to point out it's not. I'm kind of the face of some of this stuff, and that's unfair because talking about the feet underneath. If you saw those feet underneath,
we definitely could do better with the face.
Ben Sherman is a monster, and there's a bunch of other people who are truly helpful with a lot of this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to everybody. You mentioned Ben. I mean, just the entire Inside Carolina team is just ridiculous. So, it is. And see, Stephen Parrish recognizes that. Thanks to the Inside Carolina for unprecedented level of access and coverage. No problem. So what we do is say love of the game. And Don Callahan certainly loves what if you don't love it, you won't last. That's what I've always said. And that's the big thing about football. Do they really love football? Here you go. We asked about this already. Dre Day 27 asked, do you think the hiring of IMG coach will help with recruiting quickly? I think you still have to build that stuff, Don, right?
Yeah. And it's just so I got to get a better feel for what do things look like? We've used the word unconventional with Belichick's approach. And so with that, you can't assume anything as far as how they're going to approach things and their overall philosophy. So I need more time to kind of figure that out. I still believe, and we talked about relationships, I still think relationships are important. And I still think that it's difficult to have a really good it's difficult to consistently be good in recruiting without having some ace recruiters on your staff. When I say ace recruiters, I'm talking about guys like Gunnar Brewer and Lonnie Galloway and Chris Kapilovic, guys like that who are just unbelievable, just recruiters that understand the recruiting game, understand relationships and that sort of thing. And so I think that's very, very important. So it's gonna be interesting to see if Belichick does go 100% development on his staff, or if he does get some guys who can kind of pound the pavement and recruit pretty hard.
Yeah, and Michael Daniels, how the coaching staff's coming together, getting the players to fill the holes. It's all a work in progress, and like Don said, unconventional,
Yeah.
and the best place to keep up, Tar Pit.
The one thing I'm a little bit surprised about is the fact that it appears that North Carolina is going to be pretty far underneath the 85. Well, I know it's not the scholarship limit, or actually still technically the scholarship limit today. And I understand that there could be some changes or whatever, but I'm a little surprised that, you know, the first day of the spring semester is today, and that UNC is so far underneath that roster limit. So
Yeah, and that's Slee Rat, and he's regular in the chat. How many more portal targets does UNC realistically have, and/or expect to target after all the bowl games have been completed? That's an interesting thing, and there's an amazing thread on the message boards. Anytime somebody enters the portal from whatever school, it gets posted on there, and folks immediately say, "Go get them," or "That's got to have them," or whatever. It is pretty wild to me, Don, seeing starters for playoff teams going in the portal. I mean, is it a money grab? Is
well,
that what's going on?
have we actually seen starters?
I thought one of the Tennessee guys, high-level players, or at least highly ranked players, going in the portal.
The biggest one I feel like was the Penn State backup quarterback, and I know he's a backup, but they had packages specifically for him in goal line situations and running situations, and they even would have like a specific drive that they would have him. But beyond that, I feel like most of the playoff teams, it's just been backups, and then we have seen, you know, maybe a handful of guys like when Tennessee was eliminated, there was a handful of guys, maybe double-digit guys kind of enter the portal, but it was afterwards.
Alan Minton, is this going to be parity? Is parity among is all of this portal stuff, in your opinion, going to make it more level playing field for everybody, and it won't be the same 8 to 10 to 12 to 15 schools that make the playoffs? I mean, if you look at the playoffs and the CFP over the years, you know, this year was different. You had a couple that hadn't been around, but it's mostly the same teams.
Yeah.
Regardless, what do you think of how this continues to shake out?
Yeah, so I still think the rich are going to get richer, but what is really interesting is we've seen a significant drop in the SEC. You know, the SEC is not, you know, I know Texas is still alive, but you know, they're significant underdogs to Ohio State, and really kind of had to battle it out with Arizona State, which that was one of the best games I've ever seen. That was unbelievable, that game. But yeah, you know, I'm a big like let's give it a couple of years to kind of see. But my suspicion is that it's going to be mostly the rich getting richer, and then we'll see a team or two kind of make the right sort of additions, you know, and kind of rise up. I hesitate to kind of use like an Indiana as an example, because I think they were kind of, you know, I'm trying to think of a nice way to put it.
Well, they weren't very good, but they made it, and they beat all the teams they were supposed to beat.
They didn't have a very challenging schedule. I mean, and people can throw out Michigan and all that sort of stuff, but you know, and credit, they beat Michigan, but I don't think that they belong. They weren't up there with the other teams. But yeah, I think like you know, I think we could see a team or two kind of make the right connections, bring in the right guys, and that just drastically changes them into a playoff caliber team. But I think ultimately most of those, let's say 12, I know it could expand, but let's say 12, I think every year 8 to 10 of those teams are going to be traditional powerhouses, and then you'll see 2 to 4 teams that are not traditional powerhouses kind of jump in there. But a lot of that is just going to be who kind of wins the ACC and who kind of wins the Big 12. Those are going to be mostly from those teams, which is, you know, that's promising for North Carolina, obviously.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch, but I'm all in on anybody but Ohio State winning it this year.
Oh,
Who do you want to win?
what is your beef with Ohio State?
I just too many neighbors and too many
Ah,
friends that are
really? In
Ohio
Clayton?
State
I
home.
thought you would. I
It's the
thought you'd be dealing with
Midwest,
NC
man.
State fans there.
I mean, you have those, but they know their spot.
Oh,
It's the obnoxious Ohio State. I mean, there's even Wisconsin fans. I
I
mean, I don't have a beef with them, but Ohio State fans are unbelievable, and they got a right to be. I mean, they're always pretty good, but
yeah.
yeah, anybody but Ohio State for me. Who you got? And then I'm gonna get to the top five, and we're getting out of
I
here.
mean, I'm rooting for Penn State, but fortunately, in my neighborhood, it's a very transplant neighborhood. If you drive around, you see Giants flags, you see Patriots flags, you see Buffalo flags, all that. But when I lived in Cary, and I lived there for almost 10 years, it was all NC State. And so, I'd walk to my car. This was during the what was that 5-year losing streak, and I would just hear stuff all the time. It was just, yeah.
Yeah, they don't. I'll probably pull for Notre Dame this year.
Okay. See,
That would
that's
be my team.
and I think I told you so. My family is kind of torn between Notre Dame and Penn State. I have family members went to Penn State. I have distant family went to Notre Dame, but my family's Irish Catholic, so Notre Dame is pretty high up for most of my family members.
Yeah. Eric Russ in the chat says, you heard anything about Chris Jones from the CFL joining Belichick's staff? There's a Football Scoop report saying Grey Cup champion CFL head coach joining Bill Belichick's staff per reports. That would be Chris Jones. Stay tuned in South Carolina for more news about that. There's certainly a message board thread. Also tonight, just so folks can plan, we're going to try to put together a roundtable with Greg and Buck and Jason and maybe Vip and whoever else can join to talk more about coaching hires and things like that, not the recruiting side. I'm gonna let Don not have to come on that tonight since we're doing this today.
I
But
mean, if you want me to come on, I mean,
if something breaks today, then you may. So don't
okay.
say you will if you don't want to, because you know me.
I don't,
Uh,
as long as, so the next 2 nights, right? Today's Wednesday, right? The next 2 nights, I am definitely turning everything off and watching the playoff games. I'm super psyched because I think they're going to be good games regardless. So I'm psyched
yeah,
about that.
that's why we're trying to do it tonight, not tomorrow night, to let people have playoff time. Hopefully I'll get a little bit of break from a puppy and I'll be able to do a show and have some fun with those guys at 9 p.m. tonight. That is Wednesday night. All right, Don, we're
Why don't we
52
get some
minutes.
predictions in here in the chat? You can say who you think's going to win and who you want to win. So for me, I want Penn State. I think Ohio State. Ohio State looks like a freaking machine right now. I think the Michigan loss was probably the best thing that happened to them. All right, so you don't want Ohio State. You want Notre
I do
Dame?
not I do not want Ohio State, but I think Ohio State's probably the team.
Okay,
I
but
would
you
love
want
to see them lose when they play Thursday night or Friday night,
right? They
whichever
play
night they
Friday.
play. I
They
would
play.
love to see them lose, but man, they've looked mighty good.
So
And
who do you? All right, so you think Ohio State will win?
I do. I think it'll be
Okay.
Ohio State and Notre Dame in the final or in the
Okay.
championship, and I think Ohio State will win. Even though I can confidently say I will pull for Notre Dame in that
Okay.
situation. I will pull for whoever's playing Ohio State. I
All
do
right.
think Notre Dame is pretty good. It's interesting, and I kind of like Marcus Freeman for Notre Dame as well. So I heard something. This is what's crazy. I heard on the cover three, those guys were talking about ranking the quarterbacks that are left, and
Mm-hmm.
every one of them had Ewers last in the top four. Now, granted,
Yeah. You know
it's
what?
the four
So
best teams, but
I think Ewers' biggest problem is he came in so highly ranked. I think he was one of the
yeah,
highest ranked quarterbacks outside of I think there was only 2 other ones that were ranked higher than him. But I'll tell you that in that overtime where it was 4th and like 18 and that he threw that touchdown pass where they went all out blitz on him and it was a absolutely beautiful pass and he did not. I mean, the pressure was right there. He didn't care. I mean, that to me, that's an NFL throw right there.
yeah,
And so,
and that is a potentially national championship winning throw
yeah,
because they were dead. I mean, it's crazy the talent we're seeing on the
that's
fields.
interesting to me because I think Will Howard really. I mean, Ohio State's receivers are insane, and so I think Will Howard benefits from that. Drew Aller is sometimes you get it's good, but sometimes it's not so great. Riley Leonard, we know what he is. I feel like he's not. I don't think he's a guy who can push the ball down the field, but I mean, he's an absolute gamer, and he's going to. If you need someone to get that first down, he's probably the one you want at quarterback at that moment because he's going to get that first down. But
And
yeah, so
he's a likable kid too, or
yeah.
likable young man. I mean, he
Well,
just seems like
that's
as nice
surprising
as
to
he can
hear
be.
that considering he's a Dookie.
I, I've never been anti Duke like that. That's one thing about covering this stuff. And granted, I didn't cover or talk to Riley Leonard, but when you start to meet these kids, they're not as jackasses
Yeah, yeah,
as the
yeah.
fans. They're just usually normal guys. And now there are some exceptions, but like Riley Leonard just seems like a cool dude. And Jack, you need to let it go, man. You don't have to spam the chat with anti
Jack,
Notre Dame and
Jack's,
anti Duke stuff.
Jack had Jack had a lot of coffee this morning.
Yeah, I mean it is what it is. But anyway,
Maybe there
uh,
was some Jack in his coffee too.
yeah, or get some. But yeah, appreciate the liveliness of the chat. It's always fun. Don, we're gonna get out of here. We're gonna try to get out of here in an hour. We got 4 minutes to go. Top five, but I'm gonna talk about congruity first. Matt at congruityhr.com, your sponsors of this podcast and your small business go to. If you're a small to medium sized business, go to Matt at congruityhr.com. Email him, ask for a free assessment. He'll hook you up with all the deets on how to be great in the small to mid-sized business arena. They'll handle everything for you while you grow your business. They've got customer service. They've got all the technology support. They've got everything you could possibly want. Last time, what is it, Don? Matt at congruityhr.com. Email him. Free assessment. Tell him Inside Carolina. Tell him Don Callahan sent you. Top five. Top five resolutions that are broken. And I'm going to just name a couple because I didn't write it down. But let's find some. Sean Crowley, my man. Exercise more, drink less, spend less money, stop depending on social media, on the phones, and curse less. I will say I have not broken one.
You can tell he's from Pennsylvania with the curse less.
Yeah, really. I exercise more. I posted that on Twitter. I've been crushing it the last few weeks, the last
Love
several
it, Tommy.
months. Drink less, can't help you there. Spend less money, can't help you there. Probably won't have that one. Stop depending on phones. It's ridiculous how addicted we are to phones. And curse less. I've done better with that. Sleep rat. Exercise daily, number one. Don, have you been to a gym on January 2nd before?
Yeah, I'm sure, but I mean, I used to take my daughter. My daughter used to do the Planet Fitness thing, and so I used to go with her because at that time she couldn't drive. But I will say, and I don't like to say it's a New Year's resolution because I have been kind of doing this for over a year. We've talked about it. I try to get my 11,000 steps, and so every day this year I have gotten my 11,000 steps, and I actually thought that I missed it on Monday by only 200, but I must have saw my watch wrong. And so it kind of put me down. But then I looked today and I went through and I was like, oh my God, I've hit it every single day. So I need to find, I definitely have time to do it today. I haven't done it yet, but I plan on doing it today.
You need to carry your computer with you. So if you get news, you can just sit on the curb and hotspot in and do an update. So
yeah. Well, usually I have the stroller. So maybe I could put the laptop on the stroller. Maybe that's what I should do is the noon dish from one of the walks.
Yeah, you have our new fancy toy. You can certainly be out. Do you have the toy?
Well, I don't have it yet, but yes. But I can just use my regular Wi-Fi. That's usually pretty reliable.
Yeah, I mean, eating less. I try to maintain whatever weight I am because I like to eat too much. So I can't say I'm
That's
gonna
my
eat
problem.
less.
I feel like because I don't have crutches. I'm not a big drinker. I drink, but not too much. I don't smoke. Don't do drugs. Don't do drugs, kids. But if food wasn't required to live, I probably would be in food anonymous because I love sweets and I love to eat and
My thing is don't buy it. If it's in the house, it's getting eaten.
Yes.
That's the thing.
That's the number one thing. If you don't buy it, that's probably 80% of the battle.
Yep. I don't have anything else. I mean, I don't really make resolutions. I just want to stay healthy because I don't want to like kill over. And
That's see, Tommy, that's why you need to move to Holly Springs. So then you and I we can walk and, have a
we
good
would do the
time.
show walking. We could do this show walking. I think we do it one day. I say that's what we do. We do it on our phones after
Yeah.
we tell
And we
everybody to
can
get off their phones.
promote healthy living. That's what it
I'm
would be.
gonna show you one picture of this puppy, and then I'm getting out of here because the noon dish has run its course. This is the new puppy dog.
What type of dog is it?
You tell me. That is
Okay,
a mix of everything.
okay. All right.
She is a classic mutt, and
Okay.
she's amazing so far. She's going to be the death of me. This is how she sleeps when I'm downstairs.
Or do you let your dog sleep in your bed?
Negative. She sleeps
Okay.
in the crate, and
Okay.
but she has violated our no furniture thing. My other dog's rolling in his grave seeing her lay in my recliner. So broke those New Year's resolutions.
We
Anything
talked
left, Don?
about Katie and I were talking about today just how much my baby gets away with, and how how Kobe can pee on someone and it's okay, and all this other stuff. But like if I went around peeing on people, then I'd probably be in jail.
Well, she's kind of old, so I was
Yeah.
the third. So my brothers were 10 and 11 years older than me, so I was the third. My parents were tired when
Yeah.
they had me, so I got away with far more. They
Yeah.
would certainly tell you that.
Yeah.
Let's get out of here, my man.
All
Anything
right.
left? You gonna do a scoop tomorrow? You gonna try to do daily scoops? How's that work?
I mean, as of right now, that's not the plan, but I expect that plan to change. How about that?
It will change, no doubt. That is Don Callahan. This is the Noon Dish. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. I'm Tommy Ashley, your host. Stay tuned 9:00 tonight for a round table talking football. Be a fun time with the boys. Vip's show with Joel Berry and himself comes up soon enough. We'll see you next time, folks.
Thanks, everyone in the chat.
Yeah. Shout out to the chat. It's all about the chat. Join us next time.